Analysis of Labor Unions by Manu, Aggarwal, and Chiet. History of American labor unions. Labor unions in America began in the 19th century as a response to unfair and often life-threatening conditions faced by the nation's factory workers. Their primary goals were increased pay, better working conditions, and increased job security for the workers. Unions did this by utilizing collective bargaining. That is, they controlled a large enough population of workers that they could set rules governing jobs. Today in America, with the rise of megacorporations like Amazon, many people are calling for increased unionization, drawing parallels to the economic situation during the Gilded Age, where unions were workers' saviors in the face of monopolistic companies in a buyer's labor market. We seek to see, using historical data, how effective are unions in achieving their goals in an effort to determine if indeed unionization is a solution to today's labor issues. Our first visualization is union density versus minimum wage legislation. A typical goal of a union would be to increase pay for its workers, and one way we could determine pay for the workers of unions, which are typically in the lower economic rung, is minimum wage. However, this graph shows that in fact union density is not correlated strongly with minimum wage at all. The specific correlational value is 0.0477, which shows this is not a strong correlation. This would indicate that unions, at least in regards to getting minimum wage legislation passed, are not particularly effective. The next graph shows union density versus state economic rank. State rank is determined by a composite of factors, but chief among them is economic freedom and economic growth/prosperity. This graph indicates that union density is actually inversely correlated with state rank, so like the aggregate economic prosperity of a state, which would show that unions would not necessarily be good for the economic health of a large area, such as a state or a country as a whole. The next graph shows union density versus economic freedom. This graph indicates a positive correlation between union density and economic freedom, and this is on a micro level. So it's like an aggregate of individual people's economic freedom, which is defined as the ability to take economic action. So this is access to capital, access to property, sometimes the ability to collectively bargain, which would be the case for the unions. And other measures that would show an individual's ability to engage in economic decisions. So this shows that union density is positively correlated with economic freedom, showing that they would have an impact in that regard. The next graph shows union density versus insurance and retirement payments. So this is a big one. One of the union's goals is for security for their workers, both job security and financial security. Some of this is accomplished through, like we talked about before, the minimum wage and straight wage legislation. But this insurance and retirement payments is part of economic security for the workers. A large component of unions is pension funds. And this would indicate, this graph shows that union density is positively correlated with insurance and retirement payments. So this would show that the greater prevalence of unions there are, the greater prevalence of these security benefits that employees will get. The next graph shows union density versus labor market freedom, and this is the ability for workers to seek employment and to retain employment, and the ability for the worker to be protected from arbitrary firings and such. Part of the rules that factor into labor market freedom is like protections against layoffs, protections against firing, different hiring laws, and other laws protecting workers. So this graph is essentially just union density versus, we can call it like worker well-being, worker freedom. And this is, again, positively correlated, showing that union prevalence does indeed positively affect labor market freedom. So some conclusions that can be drawn from this. Despite the, I suppose we could call it rather weak showing from union prevalence to minimum wage laws, there are some clear benefits that this data has shown regarding unions, such as security for workers as measured by insurance, retirement benefits, as well as economic freedom for workers. So in the face of increasing wealth inequality in America and an economic situation with large corporations, arguably monopolistic large corporations that mirror the situation in the Gilded Age, with a buyer-centric labor market that leaves workers with little negotiating power, at the very least, this data shows that unions can't be written off as a possible solution. The correlation between unions and economic freedom, as well as unions and security benefits for employers, is it's a clear correlation. And this shows that at least unions are a possible solution toward the labor problem facing our country today. That's the works cited for the data and images.